Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00. This is the Lore and Theories video series, and today we look at the Composer. The Composer is a machine created by the Forerunners to translate an organic being's mental content into machine data. Categorized as a sublimation device, the Composer was meant to provide seamless transitions between biological and digital states. The machine was later appropriated to counteract the flood, although it failed to save the parasite's victims and was quickly abandoned in this capacity. Despite this, the Composer was later used for a number of purposes beyond its original function. The Composers were originally designed as a means by which to extract the mental pattern commonly known as an essence of a biological being of sufficient neural complexity and converting it to data by broadcasting high energy fields of entangled sympathies. The process, which was not fully understood by even its Forerunner creators, utilised neural physics, a science mastered by the precursors, being one of the few Forerunner technologies to actually do so. According to the original design, the Composer would allow old Forerunners to transfer their essences into younger bodies or directly into the domain's vast realms of information. The technology was worked on in obscurity for centuries. In the latter days of the human Forerunner Wars, after the Forerunners' first contact with the Flood, Master Builder Faber took note of the Composers and planned to use the devices to cure the parasite's victims. The plan was to save those afflicted by the Flood by scanning their patterns and removing any traces of the Flood from their digital essence, which would then be implanted into a new artificially constructed biological body devoid of the Flood infection. However, the process was highly flawed. In addition to being extremely painful to the individuals undergoing the process, all attempts to restore the essences to biological form failed, as the artificial bodies would quickly decay and inevitably die. For this reason, the Forerunners quickly abandoned the Composers after the first experiments. Flood victims subjected to Composer processing were able to retain their individuality, but the Flood would continue to rot and deform their physical bodies, the infection having survived the destruction of the original biological body and then resumed in the new one. The Forerunners attempted to slow down this process by wrapping the afflicted individuals' bodies in a form of supportive harnesses flowing with energy, but the victims would still continue to deform beyond recognition and eventually expire or succumb to the Flood. This struck me as very interesting. So the Composer was originally designed to compose biological forms into digital essences and was shortly thereafter used to help cure beings infected by the Flood, by composing them, removing the Flood from the digital essence and then implanting the now cured essence into a new biological body. The problem was that in doing so, the Flood infection once again took hold and began degrading the individual back into a Flood form. This reveals two very interesting pieces of information. The first being that when a being is infected by the Flood, the infection goes so far as to literally bond and merge with the host's own DNA to such a degree that it simply cannot be removed. Even attempts to do so are not successful, as when it is believed that it has all been removed, the Flood infection still returns. In this sense, the Flood is very much like a cancer, in that once it has infected a host, it likely causes the host's own cells and DNA to corrupt spontaneously. Thus, removing the matter known to be Flood doesn't rid the infection because the host's own cells become as infused with the Flood supercell as is possible to comprehend, and makes it near impossible to remove it without removing large sections of the composed essence altogether. I find this interesting because if the Flood is like cancer in that it uses the host's own cells and DNA to spread, it thus bypasses any immunological response as well as any surgical or in this case Composer-based interventions. That is after all why cancer kills, because it quite literally uses your own cells. It is your own cells, your own DNA, mutating to a point that it begins to shut down the primary functions of those cells, especially when they're involved with your vital organs, and since they belong to you, your immune system doesn't attack them and rid you of the infection. This is actually a pioneering field in cancer treatment at the moment, in that scientists are trying to train people's immune systems to recognise cancerous cells where they normally wouldn't, so that your own immune system gets rid of the cancer rather than having to go through chemo and radiation therapy. This leads me to believe that since humanity in the Halo universe managed to completely cure cancer by the 22nd century, so much so that it really doesn't even appear in the human genome thereafter, there were isolated cases, but One such case was that of Sergeant Michael Baird, an ODST of the Heart of Midlothian, whereby when he was diagnosed he had no idea what cancer even was, demonstrating how trivial and out of living memory the disease had actually become. The only way that cancer wouldn't appear in the human genome anymore by the 22nd century was if the pioneering treatments we are seeing in real life right now were also in the Halo universe. It's commonly known that Halo shares its history with our actual real life, real world histories. So evidently that attempt of the pioneering treatments was actually 100% successful, rolling out this treatment to all of humanity as simply a vaccination injection. So if humanity learned to cure cancer by the 22nd century, it puts us in the realms of perhaps being the best species in existence to actually look at ways to cure the flood infection, or perhaps even just make humans immune to it. In a similar, though not identical fashion to how Johnson was immune, I wonder if it would manifest in such a way as to feed back into the flood supercell at large, as a kind of vaccination for humans and a reverse inoculation for the flood, either destroying them outright or returning the corrupted form back to their precursor ancestral forms, but I think that's stretching it a little bit. The second bit of information that I find interesting is that, by all appearances, flood-infested hosts have been composed and the flood infection has survived the process. This implies that flood forms can be composed. But what would happen if a composer was used either intentionally or by accident on a Gravemind? Well, the collective knowledge and the compound intelligence of the flood would be digitized, and since essences are then stored in the composer's abyss, although, as we know from Cortana, there is also a window of opportunity to cross over into the domain, the Gravemind would then have the means to do things he'd never been previously capable of. So now you have the Gravemind's composed essence inhabiting the domain, corrupting it from the inside and everything that it connects to. This may be the ultimate tactic for galactic domination of the flood. If Cortana is infected with the logic plague and is indirectly helping the flood's agenda, she also has access to the domain and practically every single Forerunner construct in the galaxy. If she was so inclined, or rather, if the logic plague influenced her to, she may go looking for a composer and move to compose the Gravemind, who may be alive within the damaged High Charity on the Ark, or still deep within Installation 05, as I've discussed in my previous video. Gravemind is alive. Link is in the description. Once the Gravemind is composed and he gains access to the domain, he too then has the means to spread the flood infection through every system, through the domain itself and everything the domain touches, including the minds of those connected to it. This ability sets the stage for him to be able to profiteer on the galaxy-wide disarmament Cortana has enforced and put all corners of the galaxy at a laughable disadvantage, allowing the infection to spread unchecked throughout the galaxy, both in the esoteric form of the domain and the physical world by means of the normal atypical spread of the flood. It should be remembered, however, that the domain is a precursor construct, and the flood are corrupted precursors, so it would also present a possible scenario where the flood may actually be cured by the presence of the domain. Again, I've discussed before how the precursors are not gone and the Forerunners do not possess the ability to destroy a tier 0 species, and thus they're likely still out there somewhere and may even still have access to the domain, but that's straying into a subject I've covered before. So do we need to worry about the composers? Should we be concerned that the flood can be composed? Or will humanity develop a cure between now and then? I think when it comes to the flood, we shouldn't rule any possibility out. But for now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below. I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons: Nathan the Silent Cartographer, Miguel, Brian, Sebastian and Holden, the holders of the mantle, Justin, Darian, Ty, Iron Griffin and Black Biscuit, my reclaimers, Zach, Deep Cover, Verbal Statue, Spesigo, Spartan A498, Guppy and Cage, my Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. I literally cannot I know I say it every single video, but I really can't put it into words how much that means to me. There's so many of you, it's growing so fast, it's just incredible. The help that you're giving me to be able to do this is just, there. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves, and be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord. And if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more time for me to put into this content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.